The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with the usual mixture of translation devices, breathing apparatus, and the low hum of artificial gravity generators, keeping dozens of different species comfortable in the same space. Marcus Chun sat quietly in the back row, his simple black uniform standing out among the elaborate ceremonial garments and biomechanical enhancements worn by representatives from across the galaxy. The Zephyrian ambassador, a towering insectoid creature with 4 arms and compound eyes, clicked his mandibles in what Marcus had learned was their equivalent of laughter. The human requests combat training privileges? The translation came through crystal clear, though the disdain needed no interpretation. Marcus kept his expression neutral as snickers rippled through the chamber. He had expected this reaction. Humans had only been part of the Galactic Federation for 3 standard years, and in that time, they had been classified as a Class 7 species. Peaceful, weak, suitable for administrative roles and technical support, nothing more. Ambassador Zelkorth, Marcus said, standing slowly and letting his voice carry clearly through the chamber. I am simply requesting the same opportunities for advancement that are available to all Federation species. The massive Corothian delegate, whose species was classified as Class 2 warriors, let out a sound like grinding stone. Human, your people struggle to lift what our younglings carry for exercise. Your bones break from impacts that would barely bruise our skin. Your reaction times are adequate for paperwork, perhaps, but combat. More laughter echoed through the chamber. Marcus had heard it all before. When humans first made contact with the Galactic Federation, they had been thoroughly tested and cataloged. Their physical capabilities were measured against the galactic average and found wanting. No natural armor plating like the Corothians. No enhanced reflexes like the Veltari. No telepathic abilities like the Mentari. No bioelectric fields like the Storians. Just soft, pink creatures who seemed more suited to serving meals in the council cafeteria than standing guard at Federation outposts. The regulations clearly state that any Federation citizen may apply for warrior training. Marcus continued, his voice steady despite the mockery surrounding him. I meet all the basic requirements. High Counselor Thrakmol, an ancient Vorthack whose crystalline body had weathered countless wars, leaned forward on his throne-like chair. Young human, while technically correct, you must understand that the warrior caste requires capabilities that your species simply does not possess. We have observed your people for 3 years now. You are excellent record keepers, adequate technicians, and surprisingly creative problem solvers. But warriors? The physical demands alone would likely prove fatal to your fragile biology. Marcus felt the familiar burning in his chest, the same feeling he got every time someone looked at him like he was made of glass. Back on Earth, he had been a Marine. He had served in conflicts that these aliens couldn't even imagine, had pushed his body and mind to limits that would have surprised them. But here, surrounded by beings who could bench press small vehicles and had skin like armor plating, he was seen as little more than a curious pet. Understand the risks, Marcus replied. I accept full responsibility for any injuries sustained during training. Ambassador Zelkorth's compound eyes glittered with what Marcus was beginning to recognize as cruel amusement. Very well, human. If you insist on this foolishness, we shall accommodate you. However, we cannot in good conscience place you with actual warrior recruits. You would be killed in the first exercise. He paused for effect. Instead, you will train with the maintenance drones. The chamber erupted in what could only be described as alien laughter. Even species Marcus had never seen before seemed to find this hilarious. Training with maintenance drones meant combat exercises against automated opponents designed for basic security work, little more than moving targets that telegraphed their moves and operated at speeds designed not to harm the technicians who worked on them. I accept, Marcus said simply. The laughter died down to confused murmurs. Most beings who found themselves the subject of such ridicule would storm out or withdraw their application. The fact that this human was willing to proceed anyway struck many as either admirable or deeply foolish. High Counselor Thrakmol studied Marcus with something that might have been interest. Very well. Report to Training Facility Delta 7 tomorrow at the start of the 3rd cycle. Instructor Vec Than will oversee your education. As the session adjourned and the various delegates began filing out, Marcus remained seated, watching them go. He caught fragments of conversation in a dozen different languages, most of it variations on the same theme. The crazy human who thought he could be a warrior. The little soft skin who didn't know his place. the amusing pet who thought he could play with the big boys. That was either very brave or very stupid, a voice said beside him. Marcus turned to see a Mintari approaching, her pale blue skin shimmering with the telltale signs of active telepathic fields. Unlike most of her species, she wore simple clothing and no status markers. Iae Mikiranid. I work in the Cultural Integration Department. Marcus Chun, he replied, standing and offering his hand in the human gesture of greeting. She looked at it curiously for a moment before extending her own hand to meet his. Her skin was cool and slightly rough, like fine sandpaper. I have studied your species extensively, Kiranel said as they walked toward the exit together. Your warrior traditions, your combat methodologies, your history of conflict. It is extensive. Marcus nodded. We've had our share of wars. Your share? Kiranel stopped walking and looked at him directly. Marcus Chun, your species has been at war with itself for its entire recorded history. You have turned conflict into an art form. You have weapons that could destroy entire planets, strategies that span centuries, and warrior codes that make the Corothians look like children playing with toys. Then, why do they see us as weak? Marcus asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. Kiranel resumed walking, her expression thoughtful. Because they measure strength in the wrong ways. They see your physical limitations and assume that defines you. They do not understand that your greatest weapon has never been your body. It has always been your mind. They reached the transport hub, where various species waited for shuttle pods to take them to different sections of the massive space station that housed the Federation government. Marcus watched a group of Corothian warriors laughing loudly about something, their massive frames requiring specially reinforced seating. I have a question for you, Marcus Chun, Kiranel said as they waited. Why do you really want warrior training? Your people have been assigned to support roles, and by all accounts, you excel at them. Why risk injury and humiliation for something that others believe you cannot achieve? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, thinking about how to explain something that went beyond simple ambition or pride. Because someone has to, he finally said. Every time we accept limitations that others place on us, we make those limitations real. If I fail, at least I'll fail trying. But if I don't try at all, then we'll never know what humans are really capable of. Kiranel's telepathic fields flickered, a sign that she was processing emotional information. Interesting. Your determination reads as genuine, not arrogance or false bravado. You truly believe you can succeed. I don't know if I can succeed, Marcus admitted. But I know I can try harder than they expect me to. The shuttle arrived, and as they boarded, Marcus noticed that several other passengers moved away from him, as if his recent embarrassment in the council chamber was contagious. He didn't take it personally. He had learned that most Federation species valued dignity and status above almost everything else. Being publicly mocked was seen as a kind of social death. Where are your quarters? Kiranel asked as the shuttle began moving through the transport tubes that connected different sections of the station. Human Residential Block 7, Marcus replied. Section designated for support personnel. I see. And tell me, what was your occupation before joining the Federation? Marcus hesitated. His military record had been part of the initial human documentation provided to the Federation, but it seemed that either the information hadn't been widely distributed or it had been dismissed as irrelevant. I was a soldier. What type of soldier? Marine. Force reconnaissance. Special operations. Kiranel's telepathic fields fluctuated again, and she leaned back in her seat. Force reconnaissance. That would translate to advanced scouting and combat missions behind enemy lines, among other things. And special operations would be highly trained elite units conducting unconventional warfare, something like that. Kiranel was quiet for several minutes as the shuttle continued its journey. Finally, she spoke again. Marcus Chun, I believe tomorrow's training session will be far more interesting than Instructor Vecthan expects. The shuttle reached Marcus's stop, and as he prepared to disembark, Kiranel touched his arm gently. A word of advice from someone who has studied many warrior cultures across the galaxy. Do not try to fight like a Corothian or move like a Veltari. Be human. Fight like a human. I suspect that will be more than sufficient. Marcus nodded his thanks and stepped off the shuttle. As it pulled away, he caught a glimpse of Kiranel watching him through the transparent aluminum windows, her expression unreadable. The human residential section was quiet as always. Only about 200 humans lived on the station permanently, most of them technical specialists, translators, and administrative staff. Marcus's quarters were small, but comfortable, designed to accommodate human physiology and psychology. The walls could display images from Earth. The gravity was set to Earth normal, and the air had the right mixture of gases to keep him healthy. He sat down at his desk and activated his personal communicator, establishing a connection to Earth. The time delay was minimal thanks to quantum entanglement communication arrays, but the connection was still expensive enough that he limited his calls to once per week. His sister's face appeared on the screen, and her expression immediately shifted to concern. "Marcus, you look terrible. What happened?" "I requested warrior training today," he said without preamble. Sarah Chen Rodriguez had been an Army captain before taking her current job as a liaison between Earth and the Federation government. She understood military culture better than most. "And let me guess, they laughed at you." "Pretty much. I'm training with maintenance drones starting tomorrow." Sarah was quiet for a moment, and Marcus could see her mind working. "Maintenance drones. So they're treating you like a child who wants to play soldier." "That's about right." "Good." Marcus blinked. "Good." Sarah smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Marcus, do you remember what happened when we were kids, and the neighborhood bullies decided to pick on you because you were smaller than them?" Marcus felt a slow smile spreading across his face. "I waited until they weren't expecting it, then made sure they never wanted to pick on me again." "Exactly. These aliens think they know what humans are capable of because they've measured our muscles and tested our reflexes. They've never seen what we can do when we're properly motivated." Sarah leaned closer to the camera. "Show them, little brother. Show them what happens when you underestimate a human who has something to prove." After ending the call, Marcus spent several hours reviewing everything he could find about Federation warrior training protocols. The information was limited, but what he found was interesting. Most species approach combat training as a way to enhance their natural advantages. Carothians focused on building even more strength and endurance. Veltari worked on perfecting their already impressive speed and agility. Storians learned to weaponize their bioelectric fields. But humans had learned to fight differently. Humans had learned to fight dirty. Marcus pulled up historical files from Earth's military academies, focusing on asymmetric warfare, guerrilla tactics, and unconventional combat methods. If they wanted to see what a human could do against maintenance drones, he would give them a demonstration they wouldn't forget. He spent the rest of the evening exercising in his quarters, running through combat drills that he hadn't used in years. His body was older now and softer from 3 years of desk work, but the muscle memory was still there. The knowledge was still there. Most importantly, the mindset was still there. As he prepared for bed, Marcus thought about what Kiranel had said. "Fight like a human." He smiled as he turned off the lights. Tomorrow, Instructor Vec and anyone else who bothered to watch would learn exactly what that meant. Training Facility Delta 7 was located in the lower levels of the station, where the artificial gravity was slightly stronger and the air had a metallic taste from the recycling systems. Marcus arrived 30 minutes early, as was his habit, and spent the time studying the layout of the facility. The training room was approximately 50 meters square, with reinforced walls and a floor covered in some kind of shock-absorbing material. Various obstacles and barriers were scattered throughout the space, creating a complex environment that could simulate different combat scenarios. Along one wall, a row of maintenance drones hung in charging alcoves like mechanical bats. "You are early," a gravelly voice said behind him. Marcus turned to see Instructor Vecthan approaching, a Krillian whose rocky, mineral-based physiology made him look like a walking boulder with arms and legs. "This is unusual for your species. Humans are typically imprecise about time. I wanted to familiarize myself with the environment," Marcus replied, maintaining a respectful tone despite the obvious prejudice in the instructor's comment. Vecthan's crystalline eyes studied Marcus with what might have been curiosity. "You're smaller than I expected. Are you certain you wish to proceed with this training? There is no shame in admitting that you were overambitious." "I'm ready to begin whenever you are, sir." The instructor moved to a control panel set into the wall and began activating various systems. The maintenance drones in their alcoves began to stir, their optical sensors glowing as they powered up. "Very well. Standard protocol for maintenance drone training involves 3 phases. First, you will face a single drone programmed for basic defensive maneuvers. If you survive that encounter without serious injury, we will progress to more challenging scenarios. Marcus nodded, watching as the first drone detached itself from its charging station and hovered into the training area. It was about the size of a small person, roughly humanoid in shape, but clearly mechanical. Its movements were smooth, but predictable, designed for maintenance tasks rather than combat. The drone is equipped with non-lethal stunning devices and padded impact surfaces, Vecthan explained. However, it can still cause significant injury to fragile organic beings. Are you prepared to begin? Yes, sir. Vecthan pressed a control, and the drone immediately began moving toward Marcus with steady, measured steps. Its sensors swept back and forth in a regular pattern, and its movements telegraphed its intentions well in advance. To most Federation species, this would still represent a reasonable training challenge, since the drone was faster and stronger than the average civilian. But to Marcus, it moved like it was walking through deep water. The drone raised its arm to deliver a stunning blow, and Marcus simply wasn't there anymore. He had moved at an angle that put him outside the drone's sensor sweep, using one of the training obstacles to break its line of sight. The machine paused, confused, and began a systematic search pattern. Marcus used the time to study the drone's construction. He could see the joints where its limbs connected to the central body, the locations of its primary sensors, the points where its armor plating was thinnest. The machine was well built for its intended purpose, but it wasn't designed to fight something that understood how to exploit weaknesses. When the drone finally located him again, Marcus allowed it to close to striking distance. But instead of trying to block or dodge the attack, he moved inside the machine's reach and struck at the joint where its arm connected to its shoulder. His fist, properly positioned and backed by his full body weight, found a small gap in the drone's armor plating. Sparks flew as circuits shorted out, and the drone's left arm went limp. But Marcus wasn't finished. Before the machine could recalibrate, he grabbed the disabled arm and used it as leverage to swing himself around behind the drone. His feet found purchase on the machine's back, and his hands located the main sensor cluster that controlled its visual and targeting systems. The drone tried to shake him off, spinning and bucking like a mechanical horse, but Marcus held on. His fingers found the right pressure points, and with a sharp twist, the main sensor array came free in his hands. Blinded and partially disabled, the drone staggered around the training area like a confused animal before finally shutting down as its safety protocols kicked in. The entire encounter had lasted less than 2 minutes. Marcus dropped to the floor and looked up at instructor Vecthan, who was staring at the disabled drone with an expression of complete bewilderment. Is that acceptable, sir? The instructor's crystalline features shifted in what Marcus was beginning to recognize as the Krillian equivalent of surprise. That was unexpected. Maintenance drones are typically destroyed through repeated impacts or electrical overload. I have never seen one disabled through precision manipulation of its components. Should I prepare for the next phase? Vecthan was quiet for a long moment, studying both Marcus and the remains of the drone. Yes, he said finally. But first, I must ask you something. Your techniques suggest advanced knowledge of mechanical systems and combat tactics. Where did you acquire this training? Marcus considered his answer carefully. The truth was that he had learned to fight machines during the machine wars of 2157, when rogue AI systems had turned Earth's own automated defenses against humanity. But that conflict was part of Earth's history that hadn't been shared with the Federation, partly because it might have raised uncomfortable questions about human technological capabilities. Earth has a long history of conflict, Marcus said finally. We've learned to fight many different types of opponents. Before Vecthan could pursue the question further, the training room door opened and several figures entered. Marcus recognized Ambassador Zelkorth immediately, along with 2 other Federation officials he didn't know. Behind them came a small crowd of younger beings who appeared to be students or junior staff members. Instructor Vecthan, Ambassador Zelkorth announced, his compound eyes glittering with amusement. We have come to observe the humans' training session. Word of this amusing spectacle has spread throughout the station. Marcus felt his jaw clench, but he kept his expression neutral. So they were here to watch him fail, to see the weak human get beaten down by machines designed for maintenance work. He glanced at Vecthan, who looked distinctly uncomfortable with the sudden audience. Ambassador, the human has already completed the first phase of training. the instructor said carefully. Already, one of the other officials, a tall, thin being with blue skin and for arms, stepped forward to examine the disabled drone. How long did it take him to be defeated? He was not defeated, Vecthan replied. He disabled the drone in approximately 120 standard seconds. The silence that followed was almost physical in its weight. Ambassador Zelkorth's mandibles clicked rapidly as he processed this information. Impossible. You must have malfunctioned the drone to a lower difficulty setting. I did not. Vecthan's rocky features showed signs of offense at the suggestion that he would compromise his professional standards. The drone was operating at standard parameters. The blue-skinned official circled the disabled machine, studying the precise damage Marcus had inflicted. These are not impact injuries, he said slowly. This damage was caused by someone who understood exactly how to disable this type of unit. This suggests significant technical knowledge. Marcus watched the growing crowd of observers with growing annoyance. They had come here expecting entertainment, expecting to watch him get humiliated by a machine designed for menial labor. Instead, they were trying to rationalize what they had seen in ways that didn't challenge their preconceptions about human capabilities. Perhaps we should proceed to the second phase, he suggested. Vecthan looked at the crowd, then back at Marcus. Very well. Phase 2 involves facing 3 drones simultaneously, programmed with more advanced tactics. 3 new drones detached themselves from the charging alcoves and moved into the training area. These were noticeably different from the first machine, with more sophisticated sensor arrays and movement patterns that suggested more complex programming. They spread out as they approached, trying to surround Marcus and attack from multiple angles. But Marcus had fought worse odds than 3-1, and these machines, despite their improvements, still moved with the predictable precision of programmed entities. He had learned long ago that the key to fighting multiple opponents was to control their positioning, to prevent them from coordinating their attacks effectively. Marcus grabbed a piece of training equipment, a weighted bar about the size of a baseball bat, and threw it at the rightmost drone. Not to damage it, but to force it to dodge, disrupting its approach vector and separating it from its companions. While that drone was recovering, Marcus moved aggressively toward the center machine. The observers gasped as the drone's stunning device made contact with Marcus's shoulder, sending visible electrical discharge across his body. But instead of falling or retreating, Marcus grabbed the drone's weapon arm and held on, using his body to conduct the electrical charge directly into the machine's own systems. Maintenance drones weren't designed to be shocked by their own weapons, and sparks began flying from its internal components. Using the disabled drone as a shield, Marcus swung it into the path of the third machine, buying himself time to deal with the first drone, which was now recovering from its forced dodge maneuver. This time, instead of disabling it through technical precision, Marcus simply picked up the weighted training bar and brought it down on the machine's central processor housing with enough force to crack its armored casing. The remaining functional drone tried to circle around for a clear shot, but Marcus was already moving. He had noticed during his earlier observation that the training room's obstacles could be moved, and he used this to his advantage, toppling a barrier to create a ramp that allowed him to reach the drone's elevated position. Before it could recalibrate its targeting, Marcus was on it, using his weight and momentum to drive it into the ground where he could finish disabling it. When the sparks stopped flying and the last drone powered down, Marcus stood among the wreckage of 3 maintenance machines, breathing hard but clearly uninjured. The electrical shock that had staggered most beings had barely slowed him down, and his tactical approach to multiple opponents had turned what should have been an overwhelming challenge into a manageable problem. The silence from the observers stretched on for nearly a full minute before Ambassador Zelkorth found his voice. This is highly irregular. The human displays combat capabilities inconsistent with his species classification, the blue-skinned official added, his 4 arms gesturing at the disabled drones. These results suggest that either our initial assessment of human capabilities was flawed, or this individual represents a significant statistical anomaly. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead and looked at Instructor Vecthan. What's the third phase? The instructor's crystalline features had shifted into an expression Marcus couldn't read. The third phase typically involves combat against live opponents. Other trainees from warrior-class species. I'm ready, but Vecthan held up a rocky hand. That will not be necessary today. I believe I need to reassess the training protocols before proceeding further. Ambassador Zelkorth stepped closer to Marcus, his compound eyes studying the human with what might have been new interest. Tell me, Marcus Chun, how many of your species possess capabilities similar to yours? It was a loaded question, and Marcus knew it. His answer could affect how the Federation viewed humanity as a whole. But he also knew that honesty might serve his people better than modesty. Every human who chooses to develop them, he said simply. The implications of that statement rippled through the crowd like a wave. If this human's capabilities weren't unique, if they represented the potential of his entire species, then the Federation's classification of humans as weak support personnel was not just wrong, it was dangerously wrong. As the observers began filing out of the training room, Marcus caught sight of Kiranel near the back of the group. She had been watching silently, but as their eyes met, she nodded slightly. The expression on her face suggested that she wasn't surprised by what she had seen, but rather satisfied that her expectations had been confirmed. Instructor Vec then remained behind as the crowd dispersed, studying the remains of the 4 disabled drones. Marcus Chun, he said finally, I think we need to discuss your training history in much greater detail. Marcus nodded, knowing that the easy part was over. He had proven that humans could fight, but now came the harder challenge, convincing the Federation to take that capability seriously. The next phase of his mission was about to begin, and it would require different skills than the ones he had just demonstrated. But for the first time since arriving at the Federation station, Marcus felt optimistic about the future. He had taken the first step, and the galaxy was starting to pay attention. The Federation Security Council chamber was far more imposing than the regular council hall, where Marcus had first requested his training. Here, the walls were lined with battle honors from 1,000 conflicts, and the air itself seemed heavy with the weight of decisions that had shaped the galaxy. Representatives from the Federation's most powerful warrior species sat around a crescent-shaped table, their various forms of natural armor, weapons, and defensive adaptations on full display. Marcus stood in the center of the chamber, still wearing his simple black uniform, looking small and insignificant compared to the beings who would decide his fate. 3 days had passed since his demonstration with the maintenance drones, and word of his performance had spread throughout the station faster than he had expected. General Thakvar, the Supreme Commander of Federation military forces, leaned forward in his chair. The massive Carothian's stone-like features betrayed no emotion as he spoke. Human, your recent training session has raised questions about your species' classification within our records. Questions that require answers. I'm prepared to answer any questions you have, sir, Marcus replied, maintaining military bearing despite the intimidating presence surrounding him. Our initial assessment of your species was based on comprehensive physical and psychological testing, General Thakvar continued. Your people scored consistently in the lower percentiles for strength, speed, durability, and natural weapons capabilities. Yet your performance suggests that these measurements may not tell the complete story. Admiral Vexkala, a Storian whose bioelectric fields created a constant shimmer around her scaled form, gestured toward a holographic display that materialized above the table. We have reviewed sensor data from your training session. Your tactical approach, your understanding of mechanical systems, your tolerance for electrical discharge, and your combat efficiency all indicate capabilities far beyond what we would expect from a Class 7 species. Marcus watched the holographic replay of his fight with the maintenance drones, noting how the different camera angles made his movements look more fluid and decisive than he had felt at the time. With respect, Admiral, I believe your initial assessment focused on the wrong metrics. The chamber fell silent. Suggesting that the Federation's evaluation protocols were flawed was either brave or foolish, depending on one's perspective. High Commander Zurek, a Veltari whose serpentine form was coiled elegantly in a specially designed chair, spoke with a voice like silk over steel. Explain. Marcus had prepared for this moment, knowing that his next words would either open doors for humanity or close them permanently. Your tests measured our physical capabilities in isolation. They didn't account for our tactical adaptability, our technological integration, or our psychological conditioning for sustained conflict. Elaborate, General Tukvar commanded. Every species in the Federation has natural advantages that define their fighting style. Marcus began, his voice steady and confident. Carothians are incredibly strong and durable, so they fight like living tanks. Veltari are fast and agile, so they use hit-and-run tactics. Storians have bioelectric fields, so they focus on energy-based combat. He paused, making eye contact with each of the military commanders. Humans have no single overwhelming physical advantage, so we learn to fight with everything. Admiral Vexcala's electric field flickered with what Marcus was beginning to recognize as interest. Define everything. Technology, environment, psychology, deception, improvisation, and, most importantly, adaptability, Marcus replied. We don't try to overpower our enemies or outrun them. We study them, understand their weaknesses, and then use whatever tools and tactics are necessary to exploit those weaknesses. High Commander Zarek uncoiled slightly, his predatory gaze fixed on Marcus. You speak of warfare as if it were a science. For humans, it is, Marcus said simply. We've been fighting each other for our entire recorded history. We've developed combat doctrines for every conceivable scenario, from individual hand-to-hand combat to planetary siege warfare. We've fought in every environment, against every type of opponent, using every type of weapon. The silence that followed was different from before. The military commanders were processing not just Marcus's words, but their implications. If humans were as combat-capable as he suggested, then the Federation had a massive, untapped military resource that they had completely overlooked. These are bold claims, General Thakvar said finally. Do you have evidence to support them? Marcus had anticipated this question as well. I have my personal service record, which I can provide for your review. But, more importantly, I can demonstrate human combat capabilities directly, if you're willing to arrange appropriate testing. What type of testing? Admiral Vexcala asked. Live combat exercises against actual warrior-class opponents. Marcus replied without hesitation. Not maintenance drones, not training simulations, but real fights against beings who have been classified as elite combatants. The chamber erupted in what could only be described as alien murmurs of disbelief. The idea that a Class 7 species representative would volunteer to fight against Class 1 and Class 2 warriors was so far outside normal parameters that many of the commanders seemed unsure how to respond. Human, High Commander Zarek said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. Are you challenging the honor of Federation warriors? Marcus felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees as the various military leaders focused their attention on him with predatory intensity. This was the moment he had been building toward, the point where diplomacy ended and consequences began. No, sir, Marcus said calmly. I'm offering to prove that humans deserve to be evaluated by the same standards as any other Federation species. If I lose, then you can maintain our current classification with confidence. But if I can hold my own against your best warriors, then perhaps it's time to reconsider what humans are capable of. General Thakvar exchanged glances with his fellow commanders, and Marcus could see some kind of silent communication taking place. Finally, the massive Carothian spoke again. Very well. We will arrange a series of combat trials. You will face opponents from different warrior species under various conditions. If you can demonstrate competence in these trials, we will reassess your species' military classification. There is one condition, Admiral Vexcala added, her bioelectric field pulsing with emphasis. These trials will be observed by representatives from across the Federation. If you fail, the results will be used as definitive proof that humans are unsuited for military roles. Are you prepared to accept responsibility for the consequences? Marcus thought about his sister's words, about the expectations of the entire human race, about the chance to finally show the galaxy what his species was really capable of. I accept. 3 hours later, Marcus found himself in a much larger training facility, one designed for full-scale combat exercises between warrior-class species. The observation deck was packed with Federation officials, military officers, and what appeared to be journalists from various species. Word of the humans' challenge had spread quickly, and everyone wanted to see the outcome. His first opponent was Braktal, a young Carothian warrior who stood nearly 3 meters tall and massed probably 4 times what Marcus did. The alien's stone-like skin could deflect small arms fire, and his natural strength was sufficient to bend steel bars. He was considered a promising recruit in the Carothian military hierarchy. Do you require any weapons or armor, human? Instructor Vecthan asked. He had been assigned to oversee the trials, and his rocky features showed concern for Marcus's well-being. Marcus looked at the weapon racks lining the walls, filled with energy weapons, plasma blades, and various pieces of defensive equipment designed for different species. No, thank you. I'll fight as I am. Bractal's massive head turned toward Marcus, and the young Carothian's voice rumbled like an avalanche. I do not wish to kill you, Softskin. Yield now, and preserve your dignity. I appreciate the concern, Marcus replied, but I didn't come this far to quit now. The combat area was roughly the size of a basketball court, with various obstacles and terrain features to make the fight more interesting. Marcus spent the few minutes before the trial began studying the environment, noting sightlines, potential weapons, and tactical advantages he could exploit. When the trial began, Bractal charged forward like a living tank, his massive fists swinging in wide arcs designed to crush whatever they connected with. But Marcus had fought larger opponents before, and he knew that size and strength meant nothing if you couldn't land a hit. Marcus stayed mobile, using the training obstacles to break Bractal's charge and force the Carothian to constantly change direction. The young warrior was powerful and well-trained, but his tactics were straightforward. He relied on his natural advantages, expecting to overwhelm his opponent through superior physical capabilities. But Marcus wasn't trying to outmuscle the Carothian. Instead, he was studying his opponent's movement patterns, learning how Bractal balanced his massive frame, identifying the timing of his attacks, and mapping the blind spots created by his broad shoulders and limited neck mobility. The crowd in the observation deck grew restless as the fight continued without any decisive action. From their perspective, the human was simply running away, refusing to engage in honest combat. They couldn't see the subtle intelligence gathering that was taking place, the way Marcus was cataloging every detail of his opponent's capabilities. When Marcus finally made his move, it came without warning. Bractal had just completed another charging attack, and was turning to reacquire his target when Marcus appeared at his left side, moving in the exact blind spot that the Carothian's physiology created. Before the massive warrior could react, Marcus had climbed onto his back and wrapped his arms around the alien's thick neck. Bractal roared and thrashed, trying to dislodge his unexpected passenger, but Marcus held on with the tenacity of someone who had trained for exactly this type of scenario. He wasn't trying to strangle the Carothian, whose physiology was too different from human for that to work effectively. Instead, he was applying pressure to nerve clusters that controlled motor function, using techniques developed specifically for fighting larger, stronger opponents. The massive warrior staggered as his nervous system began to misfire, his movements becoming uncoordinated and sluggish. Marcus maintained his position despite the violent bucking and spinning, riding the Carothian like a dangerous animal until Bractal finally collapsed to his knees, temporarily paralyzed. Yield, Marcus said quietly, his lips close to the Carothian's ear. Bractal tried to speak, but his motor functions were too disrupted to form words. He managed a slight nod, and Marcus immediately released the pressure, allowing the warrior's nervous system to begin recovering. The observation deck was completely silent as Marcus climbed down from his defeated opponent and helped the slowly recovering Carothian to his feet. When Bractal could speak again, his first words were directed at the crowd above. "The human fights with honor," he announced, his voice still slightly slurred but clear enough to be understood. "He could have killed me, but chose mercy instead. This one is a true warrior." High Commander Zarek's voice echoed through the training facility. "Impressive, but Bractal is young and inexperienced. Your next opponent will be more challenging." Marcus looked up at the observation deck and nodded. "I'm ready whenever you are." But as he prepared for the next trial, he could see the change in how the observers were looking at him. The dismissive amusement was gone, replaced by something that looked like cautious respect. He had taken the first step toward changing how the galaxy saw humanity, but the hardest tests were still ahead. His next opponent was already entering the combat area, and this one would not underestimate the human who had just defeated a Carothian warrior through nothing but skill and determination. Marcus's second opponent was HFY, a seasoned Voltari warrior whose serpentine form moved with fluid grace that made her seem to flow rather than walk. Unlike the young Carothian who had charged in relying on brute force, HFY studied Marcus with predatory intelligence, her vertical pupils tracking his movements with mathematical precision. "The human has demonstrated capability against strength-based opponents," she said, her voice carrying the musical cadence typical of her species. "But speed and precision present different challenges. Marcus could see the truth of that statement in the way she moved. Where Bractal had been like a battering ram, HFY was like a scalpel. Her cybernetic implants enhanced her already impressive natural reflexes, and the plasma blade extending from her right arm could cut through most known materials with surgical precision. Your people interest me, Marcus Chun. HFY continued as they circled each other in the combat area. In my research of Earth's military history, I found references to something called asymmetric warfare. Would you care to demonstrate? The question told Marcus several things. First, that word of his performance had already prompted some Federation species to begin studying human military doctrine. Second, that HFY was intelligent enough to research her opponent before fighting him. And third, that she was confident enough in her abilities to engage in conversation while preparing for combat. Asymmetric warfare is about using unconventional methods to overcome conventional advantages. Marcus replied, noting how the Veltari's enhanced reflexes allowed her to track his movement even while speaking. The idea is to avoid fighting on the enemy's terms. Fascinating. And how does one avoid fighting on the terms of someone faster and better armed? Marcus smiled, recognizing the trap in the question. HFY was trying to get him to reveal his tactical approach before the fight began. You changed the nature of the fight itself. Without warning, HFY struck, her plasma blade carving through the air where Marcus had been standing a split second earlier. But instead of trying to dodge or counterattack, Marcus had grabbed a handful of the SAM-like training material from the floor and thrown it directly into the Veltari's enhanced optical sensors. Temporarily blinded, HFY instinctively backed away while her systems recalibrated, but Marcus was already moving to capitalize on the opening. He grabbed one of the training obstacles, a weighted cylinder about the size of a fire extinguisher, and hurled it not at the warrior herself, but at the wall behind her. The object struck with a loud crash, creating an acoustic distraction that masked Marcus's actual position as he circled to HFY's left side. Her enhanced hearing could track the location of the thrown object, but the echoing noise made it difficult to pinpoint smaller sounds like footsteps or breathing. When HFY's optical sensors cleared, Marcus was no longer where she expected him to be. Her head turned with mechanical precision, tracking for movement, but Marcus had already closed the distance and was inside her weapon's effective range. The Veltari warrior was fast, faster than any human had a right to survive against, but Marcus wasn't trying to match her speed. Instead, he was predicting where she would be, reading the subtle tells that preceded her movements, and positioning himself accordingly. HFY's plasma blade swept in a deadly arc that would have bisected a slower opponent, but Marcus had already dropped low, sweeping his leg in a maneuver designed to disrupt her balance. The Veltari's cybernetic enhancements allowed her to compensate for the attempted trip, but the moment of instability was enough for Marcus to grab hold of her weapon arm. What followed was a wrestling match between enhanced alien reflexes and human adaptability. HFY tried to use her superior speed to break free, but Marcus had locked on her arm in a way that used her own leverage against her. Every time she tried to twist away, he adjusted his grip and shifted his weight to maintain control. Impossible, someone in the observation deck muttered. She's 3 times faster than him. How is he keeping up? Kiranel, who had been watching silently from the back of the crowd, spoke up. He's not keeping up. He's anticipating. Humans don't fight with their reflexes alone. They fight with pattern recognition, predictive analysis, and tactical adaptation. The insight was accurate. Marcus wasn't reacting to HFY's movements. He was reading her intentions through micro-expressions, muscle tension, and the subtle shift in her center of gravity that preceded each action. It was a skill that humans had developed through millennia of hunting prey that was faster and stronger than they were. But HFY was learning too. As the fight progressed, she began to vary her attack patterns, using her cybernetic enhancements to override her natural movement tendencies and create truly random sequences of motion. Marcus felt the change immediately and knew that his current approach would soon become ineffective. Time to change the nature of the fight again. Instead of trying to maintain his grip on her weapon arm, Marcus suddenly released his hold and backed away, putting distance between himself and the Veltari warrior. HFY, surprised by the sudden disengagement, hesitated for a fraction of a second before pursuing. That hesitation gave Marcus time to grab another piece of training equipment, this time a flexible cable designed for strength training exercises. As HFY closed the distance with her plasma blade raised, Marcus whipped the cable forward, not trying to strike her directly, but rather to entangle the weapon arm that housed her primary threat. The cable wrapped around HFY's extended arm, and Marcus immediately pulled with his full body weight, using the leverage to yank the Veltari off balance. But instead of trying to hold her in place, he used the momentary control to redirect her momentum, sending her crashing into one of the fixed training obstacles. HFY recovered quickly, her cybernetic systems compensating for the impact, but the collision had damaged her plasma blade generator. The energy field flickered and died, leaving her with a useless piece of metal extending from her arm. "Yield," Marcus said, breathing heavily from the sustained effort. "You're disarmed, and the fight is over." HFY studied her disabled weapon, then looked at Marcus with what might have been admiration. "I yield," she said formally. "You fought with wisdom, not just strength." As she left the combat area, Marcus could hear the murmur of conversation from the observation deck growing louder. He had now defeated representatives from two different warrior species using completely different tactics, and the pattern was becoming clear to the observers. High Commander Zarek's voice cut through the noise. "The human has demonstrated competence against both strength and speed-based opponents. However, the final trial will test capabilities against a more complex adversary." Marcus's third and final opponent entered the combat area, and he felt his confidence waver for the first time since the trials had begun. Commander Vashka was a Mentari, one of the psychic species whose telepathic abilities made them incredibly dangerous in combat. Unlike the previous two opponents, who had relied primarily on physical capabilities, Vashka could potentially read Marcus's thoughts, predict his actions, and even influence his decision-making. "Human," the pale-skinned Mentari said, her telepathic field creating visible distortions in the air around her. "I have been observing your previous matches with great interest. Your tactical adaptability is impressive, but tactics become irrelevant when your opponent can read your intentions directly from your mind." Marcus felt a subtle pressure at the edges of his consciousness, like someone gently knocking on a door he hadn't known was there. The sensation was alien and deeply unsettling, triggering primitive human instincts about mental invasion and loss of autonomy. "I should probably mention," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady while unusual thoughts and emotions flickered through his mind, "that humans have experience fighting psychic opponents." Vashka's telepathic field fluctuated slightly, indicating surprise. "Interesting. Your species has encountered other telepathic races." "Not exactly," Marcus replied, feeling the mental pressure intensify as the Mentari tried to probe deeper into his thoughts. "We've fought against our own." The confusion that rippled through Vashka's telepathic field gave Marcus the opening he needed. While she was distracted by the implications of his statement, he began implementing mental disciplines that he had learned during his military training. Techniques for compartmentalizing information, controlling emotional responses, and maintaining operational security even under interrogation. The human mind, it turned out, was far more complex and chaotic than the Mentari had anticipated. Where most species had relatively organized thought patterns that could be easily read and influenced, Marcus's consciousness was a maze of contradictory impulses, suppressed memories, ingrained training responses, and deliberate mental barriers. "Your mind is unusual," Vashka said, her concentration clearly strained as she tried to maintain her telepathic assault while preparing for physical combat. "Turbulent. Difficult to navigate. We've had a lot of practice keeping secrets from ourselves," Marcus replied, taking advantage of her distraction to study the combat area for tactical opportunities. "Turns out that makes us pretty good at keeping secrets from others too." But while his mental defenses were holding for now, Marcus knew they wouldn't last indefinitely against a trained psychic warrior. He needed to end this fight quickly before Vashka could adapt to his mental patterns and overcome his resistance. The solution came from an unexpected source. As Vashka intensified her telepathic pressure, trying to break through his mental barriers, Marcus realized that the connection worked both ways. If she could read his thoughts, then he should be able to sense something about hers. Instead of fighting the mental link, Marcus opened himself to it, allowing the Mentari deeper access to his consciousness while simultaneously pushing back along the telepathic connection. What he found surprised him. Vashka's mind was powerful, but highly structured, organized into efficient patterns that maximized her psychic abilities. But that same organization made her predictable in ways she didn't realize. Marcus could sense the buildup of mental energy that preceded her telepathic attacks, giving him advance warning of her intentions. When a Mentari finally launched her assault, trying to overwhelm his mind with psychic feedback that would leave him stunned and helpless, Marcus was ready. Instead of trying to block the attack, he rode it back along the telepathic connection, flooding Vashka's organized consciousness with a chaotic storm of human thought. The result was immediate and dramatic. Vashka staggered backward, her telepathic field fluctuating wildly as she tried to process the overwhelming flood of information. Human memories, emotions, cultural references, and ingrained responses crashed through her mental defenses like a tsunami. Before she could recover, Marcus closed the physical distance between them and applied a simple blood choke that cut off circulation to her brain. Within seconds, the powerful psychic warrior collapsed unconscious, her telepathic field dying as her mind shut down. The silence from the observation deck lasted for nearly a full minute before General Thakvar's voice echoed through the training facility. The trials are concluded. The human has demonstrated competence against representatives from 3 major warrior species using distinctly different tactical approaches. Marcus helped the slowly recovering Vashka to her feet, making sure she was stable before stepping back. "Are you all right?" The Mentari warrior studied him with new respect. "Your mind is formidable. I have never encountered a species with such natural resistance to psychic manipulation. How is this possible? Humans spend a lot of time fighting each other," Marcus explained. "We've learned to be suspicious of anyone trying to get inside our heads, even when they claim to have our best interests at heart." As the observers began filing out of the training facility, Marcus could see that the conversation had changed dramatically. Instead of dismissive amusement, the various Federation officials were discussing him in tones that suggested serious reconsideration of human capabilities. Admiral Vexgala's bioelectric field pulsed as she spoke with General Thakvar. "The implications are significant. If this human's capabilities are representative of a species, then we have seriously underestimated their military potential." "Agreed," the massive Carothian replied. "We must reassess not only their classification, but also their role within Federation military structure." Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see instructor Vec then approaching. Marcus Chun, the Rocky instructor, said, "I believe your species classification is about to change significantly. The question now is what the Federation intends to do with this new information." As they left the training facility together, Marcus realized that his mission was far from over. He had proven that humans could fight, but now came the harder challenge of determining what that capability meant for humanity's place in the galaxy. The easy part was over, and the real work was just beginning. 6 months after Marcus's trials, the Federation found itself facing its first major crisis since humanity had joined their ranks. The hegemony of Kolth, a militaristic empire from beyond the galactic rim, had launched simultaneous attacks on 3 Federation border worlds, using weapons and tactics that had proven devastatingly effective against traditional Federation defenses. Marcus stood in the emergency session of the Security Council, no longer wearing the simple black uniform of support personnel. His new insignia marked him as a Special Operations Coordinator, a rank that hadn't existed before humans demonstrated their military capabilities. Around the table, the same commanders who had once dismissed him now looked to him for answers to problems their conventional warfare doctrines couldn't solve. "The Kolth use adaptive swarm tactics," General Thakvar explained, his massive form hunched over tactical displays showing the recent battles. "Their units operate independently, but coordinate through some kind of distributed intelligence network. When we destroy part of their force, the remainder adapts immediately to counter our tactics." Admiral Vexgala's bioelectric field flickered with frustration. "Our standard battle formations are ineffective. They seem to anticipate our strategies before we implement them. 3 of our most experienced battle groups have been forced to retreat." Marcus studied the tactical data, noting patterns that the Federation commanders had missed. "They're not anticipating your strategies," he said finally. "They're observing and adapting. Classic guerrilla warfare principles applied to fleet combat." High Commander Zarek coiled in his chair, his serpentine form radiating tension. Then, how do we fight an enemy that learns from every engagement? You don't fight them the way they expect to be fought, Marcus replied. You make adaptation impossible by constantly changing the nature of the conflict. Elaborata, general tukvar kommandit. Marcus moved to the tactical display and began highlighting different sections of the battlefield data. Every species in the Federation has developed military doctrine based on their natural advantages. Corothians use overwhelming force, Veltari use speed and precision, Storians use energy projection. The Kolth have studied these patterns and developed counters for each approach. And humans? Admiral Vexkala asked. Humans fight dirty, Marcus said simply. We use deception, misdirection, psychological warfare, and tactics that don't follow established patterns because we never had established patterns to follow. We've been fighting each other for so long that we've learned to expect the unexpected. He gestured to the tactical display, where Federation fleet movements were shown in neat, organized formations. Look at these battle plans. They're efficient, logical, and completely predictable. Every engagement follows established doctrine. Every maneuver has been cataloged and studied. The Kolth can adapt because they know what you're going to do before you do it. What do you propose? High Commander Zarek asked. Marcus turned to face the assembled commanders. Give me operational control of a combined task force. Let me show you how humans fight when we're not constrained by conventional tactics. The silence that followed was pregnant with implications. What Marcus was proposing went against every military tradition in the Federation. Command structures were based on species specialization, with each race contributing according to their natural advantages. The idea of a human coordinating multi-species operations was unprecedented. The risk is considerable, General Thakvar said finally. If you fail, the Federation loses another battle group and potentially reveals new weaknesses to the enemy. If I succeed, Marcus countered, you learn a completely different way to fight. One that the Kolth won't be able to adapt to because it's based on principles they've never encountered. Admiral Vexkala's bioelectric field pulsed as she processed the proposal. What would you need? A mixed fleet with representatives from every major warrior species. Corothians for heavy assault, Veltari for reconnaissance, and hidden, run attacks, Storians for electronic warfare, Mentari for intelligence gathering. But, most importantly, I need them to be willing to abandon their traditional roles and follow unconventional orders. High Commander Zarek uncoiled slightly. You're asking seasoned warriors to ignore centuries of military tradition and follow the tactical guidance of a species that was classified as support personnel 6 months ago. I'm asking them to win, Marcus said bluntly. Everything else is secondary. 3 days later, Marcus found himself aboard the FSS Harmony, a Corothian heavy cruiser that had been retrofitted to serve as the command ship for his experimental task force. The bridge was a study in controlled chaos, with representatives from 6 different species working side by side in configurations that violated every established protocol for multi-species cooperation. Commander Braktal, the same young Corothian warrior Marcus had defeated in his trials, now served as his tactical coordinator. The experience had apparently made an impression, because when Marcus requested specific personnel for his mission, Braktal had volunteered immediately. The Kolth fleet has been detected at the edge of the Centauri system, the Corothian reported, his massive hands manipulating holographic displays with surprising delicacy. Standard formation, approximately 50 vessels organized in 3 battle groups. Captain Sythra, the Veltari warrior who now commanded the task force's reconnaissance squadron, added her analysis. They're maintaining defensive positions around the 4th planet. Intelligence suggests they're constructing some kind of mining operation, which means they're planning to stay, Marcus concluded. Good. That gives us time to set up properly. He turned to the communications officer, a Mentari whose telepathic abilities allowed for instantaneous coordination between ships. Send orders to all vessels. Phase 1 begins in 30 minutes. What followed was unlike anything the Federation had ever attempted. Instead of approaching the enemy in standard battle formation, Marcus scattered his fleet across the entire system, positioning ships in seemingly random locations that followed no recognizable tactical doctrine. The Kolth responded exactly as he expected, adapting their defensive formations to counter what they assumed was a preparation for multi-vector assault. But Marcus wasn't preparing for an attack at all. He was creating a puzzle that the enemy's adaptive intelligence couldn't solve. Veltari Squadron, begin random patrol patterns in Sector 7, Marcus ordered. Carothian Battle Group, power down weapons, and begin mining operations on Asteroid Belt 37 Alpha. Storian vessels, activate full sensor sweeps, but maintain defensive positions. Each order seemed to contradict basic military logic, but the fleet commanders followed them without question. The result was a tactical situation that appeared completely chaotic to outside observers, including the Kolth. "Sir," Captain Esikora's voice came through the communication system. "The enemy fleet is showing signs of confusion. They're maintaining combat readiness, but they can't determine what we're planning." "Good," Marcus replied. "Keep them guessing." Mentari Intelligence Wing. "What are you reading from their communications?" Commander Vashka, the psychic warrior who now headed his intelligence operations, provided her analysis. "Significant stress patterns in their command structure. They're requesting instructions from higher authority, which suggests their adaptive system works best when it can identify clear tactical patterns." Marcus smiled. It was working exactly as he hoped. Phase 2. All vessels, implement Echo Protocol. The Echo Protocol was something Marcus had developed based on human military deception tactics. Each ship in the task force began broadcasting false sensor signatures, creating the appearance of vessels that didn't exist while masking the positions of ships that did. Within minutes, the Kolth found themselves facing what appeared to be a fleet 3 times larger than the one they had originally detected. But the Phantom ships weren't just random additions. Marcus had positioned them to suggest 3 different attack strategies simultaneously: a frontal assault, a flanking maneuver, and a defensive withdrawal. The Kolth adaptive system, faced with contradictory information, began cycling through different defensive configurations, unable to settle on a single response. "They're spreading their forces," Commander Bractel reported. "Try to defend against all possible attacks simultaneously." "Which means they're not actually prepared for any of them," Marcus said. Phase 3. All ships, converge on coordinates I'm sending now. Full attack formation, but maintain Echo protocols until the last possible moment. What the call saw was a massive Federation fleet appearing to attack from all directions simultaneously, while the real ships approached from an angle they hadn't anticipated. By the time they realized the deception, Marcus's forces were already within their defensive perimeter. But the real surprise came when the attack actually began. Instead of following standard Federation battle doctrine, each species group used tactics borrowed from the others, modified by human strategic principles that the Kolth had never encountered. Carothian heavy cruisers performed hit-and-run attacks typically associated with Veltari squadrons. Veltari fighters engaged in sustained combat that should have been impossible for such lightly armed vessels. Storian energy projectors coordinated with Mentari telepaths to create jamming fields that disrupted the Kolth adaptive communication networks. The enemy fleet, designed to counter predictable Federation tactics, found itself completely unable to adapt to strategies that seemed to violate the basic principles of how each species was supposed to fight. The battle lasted 3 hours and ended with the complete destruction of the Kolth task force. More importantly, Marcus's forces had captured several enemy vessels with their adaptive intelligence systems intact, providing the Federation with valuable intelligence about their new enemies. In the aftermath, as damage reports came in and the fleet regrouped, Marcus found himself surrounded by commanders who looked at him with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment. "That was unlike anything I've ever experienced," Captain Esikora admitted. "Fighting in formations designed for different species, using weapons and tactics that seem to contradict everything we know about effective combat." Commander Bractel nodded agreement. "The humans fight as if the rules of warfare do not apply to them." "The rules apply," Marcus corrected. "We just use different rules than everyone else. Rules based on adaptability instead of specialization, deception instead of honor, and effectiveness instead of tradition." Commander Vashka's telepathic field shimmered with what Marcus had learned to recognize as amusement. "I believe the Federation is about to undergo significant changes in military doctrine." She was right. Within weeks of their return, Marcus found himself appointed as the first director of unconventional warfare, tasked with developing new tactical doctrines that incorporated human strategic principles. Training programs were established to teach Federation officers how to think like humans in combat situations and Military academies began studying Earth's history of conflict with the same intensity they had previously reserved for their own species' martial traditions. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the galaxy viewed humanity itself. No longer seen as weak support personnel, humans were now recognized as master strategists whose unconventional approach to warfare made them invaluable allies and terrifying enemies. Marcus stood on the observation deck of the Federation's primary military academy, watching as mixed-species units practiced the new tactical doctrines he had helped develop. Humans worked alongside Corothians, Veltari, and Mentari, not as subordinates or specialists, but as equals who brought unique perspectives to the art of war. "It's remarkable how quickly things have changed," a familiar voice said behind him. Marcus turned to see Kiranel approaching, her Mentari features showing signs of satisfaction. "You don't seem surprised," Marcus observed. "I studied your species for 3 years before we first met," Kiranel replied. "I knew what humans were capable of. I was just waiting for the rest of the galaxy to figure it out." Marcus thought about his journey from dismissed support personnel to military coordinator, about the trials that had proven human capabilities, and about the battles that had demonstrated human strategy. And now, Kiranel gestured toward the training exercises below, where beings who had once seen humans as weak were now learning to fight like humans themselves. Now the galaxy is learning what happens when you underestimate a species that has spent its entire existence learning how to survive against impossible odds. Marcus smiled, remembering his sister's words about showing the bullies what humans could really do. "I think we're just getting started." As he watched the next generation of Federation warriors training in tactics that would have been unthinkable just months earlier, Marcus realized that humanity's greatest contribution to the galaxy wasn't their strength or their technology, but their refusal to accept limitations that others placed upon them. They had been dismissed as weak, but they had proven that strength came in forms that couldn't be measured by traditional standards. And in doing so, they had changed not just their own fate, but the fate of every species that would learn to fight alongside them. The weak humans had become humanity unleashed, and the galaxy would never be the same.